I've been for a number of years, a goodly number of years, struggling with what to do with my mother's Holocaust manuscript. She left really a very substantial legacy of writings and talks about her experiences in the Holocaust. And she had a message. She had a message, and she had a phenomenal memory. She was a really bright lady, had a phenomenal memory. And she spoke very, very extensively, if not continuously, about her experiences in the camps, where she really did the rounds and spent a fair bit of time in Auschwitz. And she really was pretty far into the story, meaning she was in a gas chamber and emerged alive. And that didn't happen very often. So, and she wanted, in the worst way, excuse me, she wanted to publish her memoirs. And she started a bunch of different times and wrote very extensively. But what really she left were these talks that she gave and testimony that she did with Spielberg and with Yad Vashem. And that's a pretty substantial block of material. I don't think that we need to scour through everything else to get what she wanted to say. And I've been very ambivalent, hesitant. All of whatever laziness I've got built in me really came to the fore. And this, it wasn't happening for me just like it didn't happen for her. I wasn't getting this done any better or faster or more than she was getting this done. And I asked myself, why? What's the block? And I realized that the block is that the Holocaust has been abused to adopt a negative or dismissive attitude towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That it has become the flag that somebody who wants to exempt himself from the obligations that were given to us at Har Sinai can exempt himself by waving the flag of where was God in the Holocaust. In fact, a colleague of mine who is studying the Holocaust from an academic perspective said that the depth with which Hashem has been dismissed in Holocaust studies can't be overstated. It's as if it's a given that this just, Jews won, God nothing. And I realized that I feel deeply called, in a strange kind of calling, to respond to that and to use my mother's account as a springboard, meaning I would like to write the introduction, which is going to be, I presume, very extensive, of here's how to read this book. Here's the orientation, here's the headspace, here's how to read this book about her, what she went through in the Holocaust. And if you get it and you're able to read it, then you can read it. And if you're not, it's, so to speak, a Tanai Kaful. Like I'm making an like I'm stating from as a condition that if you can't read it the way I'm describing how to read it, then struggle with how I'm describing how to read it. Don't just read it. And so I've started organizing in my head what that introduction would look like. And I realized that the reason why this book wasn't published is because it was waiting for this introduction. Because the world doesn't need another Holocaust account. The world needs a way of reading Holocaust accounts. Is that making any sense at all?
It makes perfect sense. I guess my only question is, this Holocaust account ultimately is going to be your mother's story. Is Rebbe trying to tell the reader how to read Holocaust accounts? Or is Rebbe trying to tell the reader how his mother would want them to read her account?
This is me. This is me. This is my message of how to read my mother's account.
Okay.
And I think that my mother tried to get a handle on how to read her own account. And likely because she did not succeed in making a coherent, here's how to read my account, likely that's why it wasn't published. I think that was Hashem's kindness in not having her account contribute to this almost endless stream of kfira that is associated with the Holocaust.
Okay.
And so this is like the theology of the Holocaust is what needs to be presented as the Hakdama.
That is not a small task.
Why do you think that it's not a small task?
I mean,
if you mean it because it'll be 180 degrees from what anybody's thinking today, then I agree with you.
I mean, I think that's true. But that doesn't necessarily make it large, which is to say, often I've heard Divrei Torah that start by saying something outrageous. There's no kimta to it, and etc. Da da da. Saying something that's exactly the opposite of what the audience is expecting to hear is not a recipe for disaster. It's a technique. You're effectively trying to educate people in Emunah who have not learned Emunah in the normal way, so that they can, at least in the context of a book and for the duration of a book, process something healthily.
So you're just touching on why this is such a big task. You just hit it. Let me just put it in other words and tell me if this is what you meant. The basics, the fundamentals of Emunah and Bitachon are hard enough to handle when a person is dealing with his daily bread and his daily challenges. When the place where you're trying to teach Emunah and Bitachon is an event as large as the Holocaust, you are pressing all of the bitachon buttons to the absolute maximum. All of the dials have to be absolutely lined up perfectly in order to handle this. Now, in theory, there's no difference between the Holocaust and a person having an appendectomy. But in the popular mind, the appendectomy is a no big deal, and the Holocaust is an overwhelmingly big deal.
You're also not telling it. This is not an appendix, or this is not a preface about how to read this book, because this is how your mother would have written it.
Correct.
This is not beshame your mother. If it's a crutch, but if it's beshame your mother, it
is, however, in the name of my grandmother.
This is how your grandmother would have wanted you to read the story?
Absolutely, without any equivocation. This is her message, and this is how she would have us read my mother's extremely detailed account of her experiences in the camps.
Your grandmother also survived? Wow.
3 consecutive numbers from Auschwitz. My mother, Aleh Shalom, my grandmother, Aleh Shalom, Tibadul L'chaim, my aunt, my mother's younger sister, were tattooed with consecutive numbers. Actually, my grandmother went to considerable lengths during the line of those being tattooed to get consecutive numbers to the 3 of them. She thought it might be easier to keep track of each other if their numbers were consecutive.
It makes sense.
And the picture that my mother wanted to be on the cover of her book was a picture that my uncle, Olav Shalom, that would be my mother's older brother, he photographed the 3 of them with these 3 arms. And that picture is now in the possession of Yad Vashem. And it's a picture that my aunt, this younger sister who wrote her account of essentially her life after the camps, put on the cover of her book. And my mother very much wanted that picture on the cover of her book as well. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fill that wish. Maybe yes, maybe not. But it'll certainly be in the book at some point. The three faces and the 3 arms that my uncle, who was a photographer, took the picture of those 3 arms with the consecutive numbers. So this is my grandmother's message appended onto my mother's book. And there's a certain sweet justice to that, because it was really my grandmother's faith that got them through this whole story. My grandmother was a balas, emuna, and bitachon that would rival those of very much previous generations. She was not a small timer in the world of bitachon.
Not to be preposterous, but why isn't that the introduction?
That this is my grandmother's introduction.
Yeah.
Yes, it certainly will have. It will have to be. It will have to be. My grandmother, however, was able to.
I know that you're at the age that that's all you want in life. Come here.
Mommy said yes. She said you say yes.
Oh yeah.
She would stop. Mommy said yes.
My grandmother was able to compress the entire introduction into the following sentence.
Your mommy said yes. Go get from mommy.
You get your lunch.
Daddy doesn't want a lolly. That's so sweet. You can have a lolly. I don't want one.
She said, "We don't understand Ribbon Shalom's plan, but that's not our job. Our job is to do his will. Simple. So she was able to compress the whole introduction into one sentence.
It sounds like a title. We don't understand his plan, but that's not our job.
Our job is to do his will. She would sit me down at the table, and if I didn't come on Shabbos for the meal, she lived in Bayit Began, and I was in Sanhedrin Rechevet. That's a long walk. And if I didn't come for Shabbos, I would come Erev Shabbos and get all 3 Shabbos meals fed to me on Friday. And she was a remarkable cook, very healthy, long before it was popular to cook healthy. You know, lots of vegetables and stewed and didn't lose the vitamins. You know how she learned about a lot of that is that the Nazis made them take these courses, made mothers take these courses in home economics and how to raise the master race. And she took a real liking to these nutrition courses. And on the Nazis' cheshbon, she actually took every course that was available. And she learned a great deal about nutrition. In fact, she saved the lives, her own and her children's lives. When they were liberated, they were on a death march from Auschwitz to Buchenwald. And my grandmother sequestered my mother and my aunt into a barn and wouldn't let them out. She would, excuse me, she would, like in the Gemara, she would squeeze little bits of grain into some water, and that was all the nutrients that they got, and until they were able slowly to build up. And she saved their lives, because when they came back out of this barn, and they were ready to kill her because they didn't want to be in a barn at that point. A tremendous number of people were dead because the Allies dropped chocolate wherever there were groups of survivors. They airlifted. They didn't have room for a bomb to bomb Auschwitz, but they did have planes available to drop chocolate on to the wherever there were survivors, and the survivors ate the chocolate, which is a great survival food if you're sort of kind of working your way through the jungle. It's a good kind of high fat, but as soon as they took a dose of that chocolate, they died, because their systems for years had been with malnourished. Interestingly, I just mentioned as an aside, there was one corner of one camp when the Allies came and saw the devastation they had caused by dropping these packages. But in one corner of one camp, nobody had touched the packages. And nobody knew why. And the answer came that the package said, "A gift from the people of the United States." These boxes were labeled "Gift from the people of the United States." And the prisoners didn't know what that meant. But one person was smart enough to know that the word gift means poison, because that's the German word for gift.
Really?
The German word for gift is poison. It's for poison is gift.
Right.
And in Yiddish, it's used as well. Giftig is poisonous. So he did the best Google Translate that he could. And he said, "This is poison from the people of America." And nobody touched it. And that's what saved their lives. But in any event, her faith was unflappable, unshakable. What she went through, I mean, she ended her life having given birth to 5 sons. And my father, Olav Shalom, her son-in-law, said Kaddish for her, because there were no sons left. There were those that died before the war, there were those that died in the camps. There were those that died to cancer. After, and she left a son-in-law to say Kaddish for her. And yet she had absolutely unflappable faith. She was very compassionate. Although she was a firm woman, she was very compassionate, but she would go to a Shiva house and be very supportive of the people who were sitting Shiva until they said one word about the Ribono Shel Olam.
One word negative.
One word about, you know, he did what he did, what he did. So,
how could he do this? And then she'd be like, how could he do this?
you do not speak about the Ribono Shel Olam. You're in pain right now. You can feel that pain, but you may not say anything negative about the Ribono Shel Olam. When her own son passed away, her favorite son, there was an older son who had gotten out and managed to enlist in the American army, went back into the front to be able to find them. It was really a quite remarkable person, this older brother. He was nifter actually right before my bar mitzvah. And my grandmother came from Israel to America to celebrate my bar mitzvah with me. And instead of coming straight to my house, the grandchildren met her at the airport and brought her to the Shiva house where they were sitting Shiva for her son, who had been nifter on Shabbos. And this was on Monday, Sunday or Monday that she arrived, and they brought her to the Shiva house. And as she walked into the Shiva house, she took in the reality that her favorite and oldest son had passed away at a very young age, really quite a young age. It was not yet 50, about 48, 49. And as she was taking this in, the photographer son, who, you know, I call him a survivor, but he's not a survivor. He's somebody who lived through the war, but not a survivor.
He wasn't in the camps in the way that others were.
No, he broke because a younger brother, a kid brother, was taken when he got typhus in the camp, and he never recovered from that sense of responsibility that he had for that kid brother. And he turned to my grandmother in the Shiva house as she was taking in this reality that her oldest and favorite son was gone. She said, "Oy, mama, the Ribono Shel Olam has given you so much tsaris." And she spun around like a top and she said, "And he's given me so much joy and nachas." She wouldn't let that sit in the air. She wouldn't let that sit there.
I mean, your husband so dramatic, right?
She was going to respond to that even in a moment of such intense pain. She was going to respond to that because you did not mess with Omi's relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. That was an absolute no-go zone. You did not mess with Omi's relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam.
Right. I think you and I are, yes, more cautious than other people.
So yes, in a certain sense, what I have to say is an elaboration where somebody could perhaps use what I write to access who my grandmother was, to then be able to comprehend or look at what my mother went through.
So I'm not sure that this is the topic that Rebbe wanted to go through kind of in detail, but it sounds to me like the perfect hakdama. Right? The quite literal hakdama to your mother was your grandmother.
Yes.
Certainly the hakdama to your mother's survival was your grandmother's amuna. I think
No
introducing your grandmother as the natural hakdama and speaking out how she would have this book read is the only way to do it. The question, how, I mean, now that's a story that's deeply compelling, right? That's not, just the son who's writing it, reinterpreting his mother, reinterpreting a situation after the fact who didn't survive it. This is, you know,
This is how this is Omi's story.
This is Omi's story. This is this is Omi's story, right? And that it's very natural and it's very compelling. And I don't think it will single-handedly give people the kalim to read a story like this helpfully, but it might give people a lens and marginally change how they read this story and prevent real Chil Hashem, rather potentially giving them moments of reading it according to how Omi would read it, which is not something they would normally experience.
And
it will be
ending the story the way Omi ended the story.
Yeah. And
Omi's not just the Hakdama. She's not just the preface to the story. She's also the afterword to the story. That her emunah was strong enough not just to get her into the story, but it was strong enough to keep her going after.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly compelling, and in the sense it's easier because when it's my parnasa, the anxiety blasts little pieces of me everywhere. I can't get out of my own way. I had a very, very minor motorcycle accident one time, and I wasn't wearing gloves. I was wearing leathers and everything else. I wasn't wearing gloves, and my hands were sticky because I had taken off the top layer of skin on my hands. Right? When people are raw, they're sticky. But people are raw about their own parnasa. They're going to be raw also about this, but it's not as personal. It's a generation away. Part of the problem is making it more personal. In a sense, even though this is a much more difficult thing to be a balamuna on, it's sufficiently theoretical or hypothetical to present day readers.
Hey, what is that? What is that?
That's cuteness incarnate.
What is
Nope,
that?
I'm sorry, that's a lot of screw bits. And I will, number one, they're not so safe for you. Number two, I will never see them again in the right order.
I'm gonna run.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, I'm absolutely very, very grateful that you're sharing your thoughts, and I want to pick them. I want to pick your brain extensively, but I want to just acknowledge that what we did tonight, I think I would like to use, and if you don't mind, I will let whoever wants to see it, and
Please.
think about it.
Please.
Beautiful.
Have a wonderful week.
Thank you so much, Kultiv. Thank you again.
Kultiv. You too.